Shavua Tov and Chag Sameach. We'll be focusing on Daf Chaf Zayin, but first we have to mention Shmuel back on Daf Chaf Vav Amid Beis, and Shmuel makes a distinction between the Basar and the Bailim themselves. As far as Shalom Komo, if it wasn't placed in the right place. So according to Shmuel, the Basar becomes possible because the dam was not thrown in the right place. However, it doesn't mean that that's ma'akev the kapara. The kapara is a full-fledged kapara, despite the fact that the dam was placed in the wrong place on the mizbeach. Instead of lamala, it was put lamata, and so forth and so on. But Shmuel derives from a pasuk that any place on the mizbeach is enough to be machshir the korban, so the korban is kosher. And on the bottom of Chavav Amid Beis, the Gemara asks a kasha meisvei, that's 3 lines up, from a brisa that says Chishev litein es haniton lamala lamata, or lamata lamala li alter on that same day, kosher. Chazer v'chishev, if later on, at a later stage, he had a machshava of chutz limkomo here on the top of Chav Zayin, posel v'eimbo karis. So this is the principle that'll be a subject of our discussion, that if the machshava the kohen was for chutz limkomo, then although the korban is pigel technically, but if you eat it, you're not chayav kares. However, chutz lizmano, if he has in mind that the avoda or the haktoras haimurim should be done a day later or 2 days later, that's called chutzes manu, then it's pigul v'chayav noleh karis. If you eat the basar, it's yechayiv karis. So all that is a case where his machshava was li'alter. However, l'machar, by contrast, if his intention was to do the avodas hadam outside of its makom, but for the following day, then for sure it's possible, because as we said before, and this is going to be a kash on Shmuel, we see that Shalom Komo apostles the korban. However, it's not a chiyuv pigul, it's not a chiyuv kares, but chazav and chishav. If on the other hand, let's say after he had that machshava during shchita kabbalah, during zrika, he again had a machshava of chutz l'zmano chutz l'mkomo, then bein chutz l'zmano bein chutz l'mkomo posel v'ein karis. So the reason for this is because when he has a machshava of lamachar, he automatically passes the korban, and if he passes the korban, then even if subsequently he has the wrong machshava, it doesn't become a chiyuv karis. So the Gemara now asks a kash on Shmuel based on this price. The shalom kim komodami, according to Shmuel, that if the dam was placed lamala instead of lamata, etc., shalom komo, the korban is kosher and the bailim will achieve a kapara, then high posel pigelhu. Why does the Brisa say in the last case that it's only possible, meaning the korban is invalid? It should go beyond that. It should become pigul. Because initially the Kohen's machshava was to be zorik the dam shalom komo, but from machar in the sefer, and that itself should make it pigul. because whenever you have a machshava during the avodos for lemachar or liachar zman, then it becomes pigul. Now, all this is an objection and attack against Shmuel, because if not for Shmuel, we could simply say that the carbon itself is possible because it was shalom b'mkomo. But Shmuel says the carbon is kosher, and therefore any machshava of pigul would register according to Shmuel, and it should generate pigul. So the Gemara quotes Rav Zutra to defend Shmuel: Zrika de sharia basa b'achila, Maisili de pigul, but zrika de lo sharia basa l'achila, lo maisili de pigul. The Gemara now adds a special condition to the law of pigul, and that is that pigul only applies when the dam could have been thrown onto the mizbeach, and that would achieve two goals. Number one, it would generate a kaparas hakorban, but number two, the zrika is also matir the basal achil. Let's say, for example, in a carbon shlomim, you're not allowed to eat the basar, the shlomim, before zrika, or for example, in a carbon chatas, the kohanim can't eat the basar before the zrika. And now we have a case where the zrika is only meaningful part way. It's only effective as far as generating a ritzui carbon is concerned, but as far as being matir the basar b'achila, then it cannot be matir the basar b'achila. If it cannot be matir the basar b'achila, then there's no pigul. And this is apparently a sugya later on, that only when you have a complete zrika that has number one is mechaper and makes the carbon into a valid carbon, number two, it's matir the basar fachila, that zrika can be subject to pigul if he has a machshava of chutz lizmano. So if the kohen did the zrika chutz l'mkomo, meaning lamalo instead of lamata, etc., and even though he had a machshava kavana that the basar should be eaten beyond its zman, that's a chutz zmano, it's not pigul, because since the original zrika was shalom b'mkomo, then although the carbon is ola l'baylim l'shem chova, that's Rabbi Yochanan, but nevertheless it's not matir the basar. And let's say in a case, Rashi says, where the kohen had implemented any of the major avodos, let's say Kabbalah or Holacha or Zrika, with a kavana to apply the dam shalom b'mkomo, and it was lamachar, then it would not make it pigul. Amalei Rav Hashi Mar Zutra, how do you know this? How do you know that the Zrika has to be matir the basar in order for it to be subject to a machshavas pigul, to create pigul? The chsiv, because the pasuk says in Vayikra Perek Zayin, v'im he'achol yachel b'psar zevach shalom pigul yeh, that if the machshava of the kohen was for a third day, meaning, let's say, for example, in shlomim, which apparently the Torah says, b'psar zevach shlomim, if we're talking about a carbon that could be eaten for 2 days. And now the Kohen has a machshava to eat the carbon, the basar carbon, 3 days down the line. And the Torah says, pigulhu. So Misha pigulo garam lo, the reason why you're not allowed to eat from the basar is because you had a machshavas pigul. Yotzeh zeh she'ein pigulo garam lo. Right? What caused the Iser of Achila here in the basar? It wasn't the machshavas pigul, but rather it was the fact that he put the dam in the wrong place on the mizbeach. El Iser davar acher garmu. So the Iser comes from the side, and it's not a result of his machshava. And therefore, if somebody eats the meat, even though the carbon is possible and the meat is also bachil, but he doesn't get kares for this because if he shechted an animal for an intention of being zorik nedam shalobim komo machar, then that intention, even though he's got the chutz lizmano machshav, but nevertheless it would not create a full-fledged pigul. So the Gemara asks, Hachi, if you're telling me that because he had a machshava of zrikas adam shalobim komo, that it doesn't create pigul, why don't we go a step further and say psule nami lo lifsal? Maybe it shouldn't even passel the carbon. The Bryce only says that although the carbon is possible, but the basar is not also midin pigul. Omer of Nachman bar Yitzchak midi dahavia machshavas hinuach. So the word hinuach here means when you want to leave the dam till the next day. Any carbon whatsoever, without exception, the dam needs rika on the same day of the shechita. But if the carbon had a machshava of zrikas adam tomorrow, the next day, that's called machshavas hinuach. Hinuach means to leave it over. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that the machshava of zrikas adam lemachar, which is called machshavas hinuach, is enough to passel the carbon. Now, that's based on a Mishnah later on in Lamed Hey. I don't know that anybody would argue about Rabbi Yehuda, but the Chachamim rejected Rabbi Yehuda, and they claim that such a machshava to leave the blood over till tomorrow is not pigul, because pigul has nothing to do with the zrikas adam. Pigul has to do with the haktoras haimurim, which we could say is the achila of the mizbeach. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that the carbon is possible. And the reason for that is because, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he has a machshava for one of the very important avodos to perform that avodah tomorrow, which would passel the carbon. So since he had that machshava of leaving over the dam until tomorrow, that passels the carbon. Because any avodah has to be done, as we said before, on the very day of its shechita, cannot be left over till tomorrow. In our brisa, the Kohen had an intention to be zorik the dam shalobim komo, and now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the carbon is possible, because just like according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the case where he wants to do the zrika tomorrow, the carbon is possible. So too, if he wants to do the zrika shalobim koma on the wrong part of the mizbeach, then that's equivalent to having a machshava of doing the zrika tomorrow, and therefore the carbon is possible. So that's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Yehuda. However, Reish Lakish Amar li'olam posel mamish. Maybe the Mishnah means that when the dam against Shmuel, when the dam is placed on the wrong part of the mizbeach, the carbon is possible. The shalobim komo kimikomo dami. And even though I agree in principle, fundamentally with Shmuel's principle, that if it's in the wrong place, it's considered as if it was in the right place, and Shmuel derives some psukim that is machsha the carbon. So how could Reish Lakish say no, the carbon is possible? Lo kasha. Kan shenosan b'shtika, kan shenosan be'amira. Now, if I had to interpret this Gemara based on the Rambam Shita, without looking into Rashi and Tosfos, I would say the Gemara is differentiating between a machshava that was only in the mind of the Kohen as opposed to a verbalization of that invalid machshava. And the only reason the carbon is possible is because the Kohen enunciated that machshava. However, that's not the pshat apparently in this sugya, and maybe we'll mention the Rambam Shita later on. But rather, when we said that if the dam was placed shalom komo, up or down, etc., we're talking about a case where the Kohen, when he applied the dam lamala instead of lamata, he was totally silent. And the Mishnah that says that the carbon is possible, which we had a kasha on Reish Lakish because we're holding now shalom komo kim komo dami, that's where the Kohen made a statement that the carbon, I should say the basar carbon, should be nechal al gabi mizbeach li acher zman. So if the Kohen did a zrika shalom koma and he verbalized his intention that the basar should be eaten 2 days or 3 days down the line, then the carbon is possible based on the intention of the Kohen to eat the basar or bimaktu the basar liachar zmano. And in such a case, it won't become pigul because it's already possible. So the Gemara is going to now ask the same kashas against Reish Lakish that it raised against Shmuel. The Mishnah says, Chishev li tenas anitanu lamata lamata, and then it says that midi dahavi amachshavas hinuach alivad Rabbi Yehudahu. Fine. Okay, so we're not going to go through the whole Shaklavataria a second time around. Now the Gemara presents Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. I don't have to introduce, as Reish Lakish was forced to do so, that he made a statement that the carbon should be eaten liachar zmano, but it was b'shtika. Shalom komo lav k'mekomo domi. I disagree with Shmuel, and I reject his premise, and I hold that shalom komo is not considered like it's bimkomo. And ha, in the Mishnah, de'ika dam nefesh, there's still blood that's spurting forth from the neck of the animal, and it's dam tamtis. So there's a possibility of redoing the avoda. Ha deleka dam nefesh. The other Mishnah, which says that the carbon is possible, is talking about a case where there's no tamtis. So I don't get it. I mean, according to Rabbi Yochanan, what are you telling me? You're telling me that there's no kares in this case because there's dam nefesh. I don't know. That doesn't sound like a chiddush. All right, you have to reiterate what Shmuel had said back on Daf Chavav, that the Mishnah was talking about a case where a Kohen apostle, did the Zrika Shalobim Koma, and therefore you can salvage the carbon with the Dam Nefesh if there is Dam Nefesh. So the Gemara raises the following objection to Rabbi Yochanan. Tonight we learned in our Mishnah with regard to a case of Shalobim Koma, Posel V'Ebo Kares, Bishlam Reish Lakish. I understand the Chiddush of the Mishnah. According to Reish Lakish, Hainu Diktani, it wants to teach us that it's Posel V'Ebo Kares, that even though the Kohen had a machshava, that the basar should be niktar li'achar zmano, nevertheless, there's no chiyuv kares. So we now justify the necessity for the Mishnah to tell us that the dam was placed shalom komo, And that's the reason why it's mafkia the chiyuv kares. El Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're telling me that the carbon is possible. My ain bo kares. What's the chiddush of the Mishnah to tell me that there's no kares? Would I have a havamina that there's a chiyuv kares over here when the carbon is completely possible? According to Rabbi Yochanan, the carbon is not possible, and therefore I might think that his machshav of chutz lizmano would generate a full-fledged pigul with a chiyuv kares. Kamashma, no, that since the zrika was done shalom koma, therefore it will not allow for a full-fledged pigul. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, I mean, we're talking about a carbon that's possible. Then who would even entertain the possibility that this would be pigul? Right, pigul only applies when the carbon theoretically, potentially could be kosher. Kasher, the Gemara doesn't have an answer. The Gemara now says, "Ulishmuel, my aim bo kares." Right, Shmuel also, as opposed to Reish Lakish, but like Rabbi Yochanan, instead he applied the dam in b'shtika, in silence. Hachi kamarim nosan b'machshava pasul v'ein bo kares. So again, what happened was that the Kohen actually applied the dam in the wrong place with the intention of being mak to the basar chutz lizmano, and it's pasul, but there's no kares. Just 1 second. Right. In other words, again, if he didn't have a machshava of chutz lizmano, the carbon would be kosher according to Shmuel because shalom komo kimkomo dam, even though he put it in the wrong place on the mizbeach. But here, he's got a double whammy. In addition to the fact that he placed the dam in the wrong place, he had a kavana to eat the basar, consume the basar in chutz lizmano, and therefore it's possible, but there's no kares. For Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Shalom Komo Lavkim Komo Domi Lehevi Ki Nishpach Min Akli Ala Ritzpa V'Yasfenu. Basically, according to Rabbi Yochanan, if the dam was not placed in the right place, the carbon is possible because it's like a case where he didn't do the zrik at all, like Nishpach. If let's say the vessel in which he received the dam spills on the floor, then the halach is nothing registered over here. There was no zrika in effect, and therefore Yasfenu, he's allowed to start from scratch. But yet our Mishnah seems to indicate, no, the carbon is possible, and there's no possibility of salvaging the carbon. And the Gemara answers that now we have to introduce another shita in the Tanoim. Sovala Kamandi Yomer Lo Yasfenu. Right, there's a Tana in our Mishnah who holds that if the carbon, the dam of the carbon was applied in the wrong place, then you cannot gather the dam and replace the avodah. Once the dam of the carbon reaches the mizbeach, even though it was in the wrong place, the mizbeach, so to speak, accepts the dam to the extent that it registers on the mizbeach, and no longer can you replace that dam. And that's the chiddush of this Tana. Again, if the dam was nizrak b'mkomo and the avodah was complete, then for sure there's no room for a new zrika. But the Tana is telling us that even though when the dam was applied in the wrong place, and therefore it's invalid, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, even the carbon is possible, then you would think that, okay, so let him try to gather together whatever dam he can. It's no different than Nishpach. But the answer is that we're going according to that Tana, who says that once the dam was Nizrak Shalom Komo, then the Mizbeach was makabel that dam. The Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, Omer Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Hakol Bo, the B'nitanim L'mal, Nosan L'mat L'mat, Nosan L'ad Shalom Mitzvason, Lo Yasfenu. If it was shalom k'mitzvason, let's say, for example, he had a machshava of Shini Kodesh, or let's say, he was Yoshev, or he was Tomei, or he did it with his Yad Small, Lo Yasfenu. And the reason why Lo Yasfenu is because he did it Shalom Kimitzvason. Lo Nechleku, where's the issue between the Tanakama and the other Tana? El Bison Lamal, Shanos Lamat, Lamatu Shanos Lamal. Shab Yossi Omer Lo Yasfenu, Rab Shimon Omer Yasfenu. Oh, we forgot, sorry. The name of the Tana who holds Lo Yasfenu is Rab Yossi. Sorry for that. And Rab Shimon Omer Yasfenu. And then the Gemara says on Daf Chav Zayin and Beis Mishnah Seinu Kedivri Omer Lo Yasfenu. Our Mishnah reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. He says here that Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yossi both agree that regard to Nesinas Hadam Shalobim Komo, the carbon is possible. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon holds, just replace the dam with another zrika and gather together the dam that's left. Rabbi Yossi holds that no, once the dam reaches the Mizbeach, then it cannot be reapplied anywhere else. Rabbi Yossi is based on the logic that Nesinas Hadam Shalom Bimkomo is Bimkomo. No, that can't be. If that were the case, then instead of arguing against Reb Shimon regarding Asifas Hadam, he should have argued as to whether the carbon is kosher or not. Since he states merely that the dam may not be gathered up, clearly he agrees that the initial application is invalid. He holds that the blood is nevertheless precluded from reuse, even though normally we say that if the Zrikas Hadam was invalid, then you start again with an asifa, like the case where the dam fell on the ground.